Welcome and thank you for tuning in to Through the Door, the insider's perspective on running a business. I'm Megan Comfort. I'm the small business manager at Nevada State Bank. And this is a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and leaders and get their thoughts and lessons learned on running a company and some of the decisions that they've made throughout their time as a business owner. So I want to introduce my guest. His name is Matt Bontrager. He is the managing partner over at TrueBooks. It's a CPA firm that does all things tax related, but also focuses on tax planning and tax strategy. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm pumped.
Yes. Well, so we typically start these episodes off talking a little bit about your origin story, a little bit about your background and how you arrived at, forming and running TrueBooks.
Cool. So born and raised in Nevada, which I like. I take a lot of pride in.
A rarity.
I know.
Yeah.
I feel like when I talk to people, I'm like, oh, I'm one of the 10 people that are still here. Everybody's like, I'm waiting to leave. No. So I'm here. Born and raised here. I went to high school at Western, and I was going to go play. I tried to play college baseball. Did not work. So then I'm like, oh, something safe. We go accounting degree.
Okay.
Accounting degree. I had an interest in money. I worked at the bank at the time. So I worked at Wells. And through college in accounting, they're always preaching to you. You got to go Big Four or you got to go industry. So I could go work at a casino out here and be like an internal staff accountant, or go get my license as a CPA and go to the Big Four. The Big Four was immediately something that I wanted to do. So,
but you needed your hours, right, in order to actually become a CPA.
Exactly. So you need not only educational credits, but then you need work experience hours too, which is good that you asked that. So as a CPA here in Nevada, you either need, at the time when I did it, 2,000 hours, basically 2 years of public or 4 years of industry. So you can see there too that if I was going to go be like an internal staff accountant somewhere, I'd have to wait 4 years to get my license instead. So the Big Four route made a lot more sense to me, and it had more money attached to it, which I think too was just was more prestigious. So I tried everything that I could to get to Deloitte. That was, we have 3 of the Big Four firms here in Vegas, and so that was the firm that I wanted to go to, and it worked. So I worked through school, went to every networking event that I could, put on a suit, went to all the lunches, and that worked out well. Spent about 2 years at Deloitte, so I've been in public accounting out of school since.
UNLV grad?
UNLV, yeah, I didn't even say that. Oh my God, that's how nervous I am. Yeah. I went to high school here, and then I went to UNLV. I went to CSN, which is their community college, and then I went to UNLV. So
I followed the same path.
Love it.
Finance, though.
Did you just see UNLV beat Reno? Were you at that game?
I wasn't. I had tickets, but I was in Montana. But
it was good.
I know.
Oh, I want to go to Montana. It was good. So went to UNLV. I know, go Rebels. Graduated from UNLV, went to Deloitte. It's very common in tax or accounting that you'll start to grow a book of business on the side as an accountant. So you'll catch a client here and do their tax return. You'll do some bookkeeping here. So after Deloitte for about 2 years, I stayed in public accounting, which is, again, serving a multitude of clients. I didn't work for one client. And my book of business on the side, this is 2018, was maybe like 40 grand. So, and my W-2 at the time was maybe 75.
Okay.
My wife was making okay money, 80 to 100. And so the book of business was growing for me. And I got an opportunity. I saw somebody post online. They were a real estate investor here in town, and they needed a bookkeeper. And I was like, oh, I could do this with my eyes closed. So I reach out, and after a few meetings, landed him as a client. That was at like $2,200 a month.
Oh, wow, nice.
I know, on top of the 50 that I had on the side. So I'm like, this is great. Yeah. This is great side money here.
That's a big client.
So I know, a big client. So then I had made a joke to him like, hey, we should start a firm together. He had a big presence online and was doing pretty well in business. And he was all for it. So then this is about 2019. And it was Q3, Q4 when I brought that idea to him. Quit my job December of 2019. I had just had my first son that May. So he's like 6, 7, 8 months old, something like that. And quit my job in December, started my firm January 1st.
Of 2020.
2020 COVID year, yeah.
Wow.
So that's like the fast track.
Tell me a little bit about starting your business, because was it similar to what happened to a lot of other companies? Like, for example, my husband, he started a company December of 19, not realizing that 3 months later would have to board up his other business, and not deemed essential. So did you go through like a kind of panicked moment a little bit, or was it more you dealing with panicked clients? Like, what was that experience like?
I like that you said that because you just gave me that is the answer. It was so grateful that in 2020, I didn't run into a hiccup in business. If anything, our business skyrocketed. And because we were virtual from the start, I didn't have any like hard, really overhead costs like a building or rent. And so again, I didn't really have to board anything up. If anything, I was shielding questions off from people that were like maybe losing their jobs or transitioning into how they made money. They were moving positions, whatever the case was, moving industries. So it didn't really affect us much, which thankfully.
So it didn't affect you, but it sounds like it kind of helped your business from that perspective.
Negatively, it didn't, yes. But yeah, it had a huge impact to us as far as clients because we were remote, and it was at that time, again, people were, I think, a little bit more worried about their finances at the time, whether it was business owners.
Calling you and asking you, like, were you trying to brush up on, like, PPP knowledge or, like, the ERTC funds and all of that, fancy footwork that kind of came out over the years? Were those things that you had to?
Huge. And so, like, we could spend 2 hours on that topic. I stayed away from those. So, again, we're talking late 2020, 2021 when those programs started to come out. The term that we had for like in the CPA world was basically helicopter money. You probably saw it too from the bank. There was so much money being like thrown around that what concerned me was, yes, we had a lot of clients that were reaching out to us, asking us for help to fill out those applications. And we were a hard no on it. It wasn't clear at the time really how to even get the money because it was all new rules, but we stayed far away from helping people. I maybe ran calculations for 2 or 3 people on PPP. They got the money, but I wasn't signing any paperwork saying that I was helping them do this and filling out the apps for them because it was a lot of money opportunity wise for us. But seeing now what's going to come from that, I think so many people are going to go to jail, period. The referral fees that people were paying were insane. We could have got 20% at some point, 20%. Let's say I wrote someone's paperwork to get them a PPP loan for $100,000. I could have got $20,000 within 10 days of writing that application. And then they would just have to obviously wait for the difference.
That was like firms that were saying, hey, give me a portion of the funds and I'll do the
all these
paperwork
ERC specialists that were popping up. But it was basically if we would help with like submit apps and basically, because the biggest question with PPP was, do you really qualify for this money? Reading the rules, getting your financial statements together to determine if you can really, apply for this. And even then it was so shady. Let's say somebody was going to get $100,000 back. If I wanted the money up front, let's say I could have got $20,000. If I was willing to wait for the money, I would have got 30.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good at all.
None of it sounded well. So it's like now we're seeing all these articles pop up where it's like, oh, they got PPP money and went and bought a Lambo with it. And so we just stayed far away from it. If clients got the money and they needed help with like, hey, now what do I do with this? Great. We're your we're your CPAs. We're going to help you with this. But I'm not going to write applications at mass volume to try to get people money for this. So we stayed far away from that stuff.
And I think that was probably, I'm sure there's always going to be an industry or companies that are going to try to take advantage of something like that. I'm more so focused on not necessarily the scams and the negative side of it, which I know was very bad. More so the actual businesses that needed it and that used it for the purposes intended, which I think was really important. It also made a lot of people realize, or at least in my mind, it made me realize how interesting it was how people paid themselves or paid others, and them not realizing that was not obviously things that they could necessarily obtain PPP funds for if they had all independent contractors. They had to do their own PPP loan. If you were an S Corp and you just paid yourself through distributions, technically you don't get PPP because that's not part of it. And so I think that it really kind of opened up people's eyes more so to understanding the importance of financials. And
financial literacy totally was a good smack in the face for people there.
Because it was something that I think a lot of people took a real hard look at and was like, wow, I'm not able to really benefit from anything legitimately because I'm not really doing what I probably should be doing with my financial reporting, or I've just been doing it a different way, not realizing that would impact me from something like this. But I mean, at the same time, who knew we were going to go through a pandemic, right? I always joke and say, who knew banking could be so exciting? Because it was a very exciting time. We were, and I remember coming to work and not leaving, just working probably 20 hours, like literally sleeping here and just
during those times of
just caring so much about making sure that people were taken care of, because you could hear the stress and the strain in their voice, and
1,000%.
and I mean, as a business owner, when you start to provide for others through employment and jobs, your business takes on a life of its own. It becomes this separate entity outside of yourself that you have to basically continue to feed and make sure that it survives, because there's so many other people depending on it.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. So you venture into getting your CPA. Now your book of business is bigger than really your W-2 employment that you had at the time. And so you make this move with a partner, it sounds like. And then what was the strategy there then to grow it? Because you're a unique CPA. Most CPAs that I know, they're not trying to be in the limelight.
Yeah.
They're
from a content.
they're not, necessarily. I think that's a big shock for a lot of people in the CPA world too, when they're getting into accounting is, well, wait, what do you mean? Like, I just want to be able to crunch numbers and do things like that. I don't want to have to network and go out there and find new clients and build a book of business or things like that. Is, I think, a very big shock for the personality type that goes into accounting.
When we started the business, it's funny because all of that now, which right as I walked into the UNLV game, someone looks back to me, he's like, "Oh, you're the tax guy?" And I was like, they were like, "It's nice to see you outside." I was like, "I feel like I go outside." But that was very new for me now. When I started this business, it was, I'll be the operator. Hey, you do all the marketing and you talk about us online and you get people to come to us. And that's how it was for the first 2.5 years or so, until I started to make videos online. And you cringe at the first couple, but then it's like, whoa, you get some good exposure. And so that's what kind of flipped the script. But starting out, I don't even think we had a strategy to grow. I think it was, we really capitalized on his current business. He was a home flipper and did not only home flipping, but educational products. So like online education. So, hey, I've learned how to do this. Let me teach you how to do this now. And just the lead volume and the sheer exposure that the internet brought him for his businesses just easily trickled to us. Because it was, not only was he getting questions as to who's your CPA, who's your accountant, now he could say he owned a firm and we helped people similar to, him in his situation. And it was really no strategy. But like I say, when we got so lucky, we did 120 gross in the first year. The second year we did 860. Wow. Third year we did 2.6.
So with that growth comes capacity constraints and client experience, and especially you're talking about those numbers.
Yeah.
It's funny because as a business owner, I could be like, oh my God, that's a huge success, like amazing. But as a banker, I'm like, ooh, that's concerning, because how do you manage through that growth and make sure that it doesn't implode on itself?
Failed pretty hard in 22. 2021 and early 22, I started to do content. So now we had double the lead volume. Think of it as we had his audience, and then now I started to grow an audience as this just person that talked taxes online. It wasn't really no one that wants to talk taxes is going to go online. They're usually 65-year-old men who's just like phasing out of their practice.
Or like Ben Stein, whom I love, but very, very dry.
So the thought is, now we had all this lead flow, and in 2022, I got featured on a podcast so we're real estate focused. We help a lot of real estate investors. This was a real estate investor podcast, and I had landed a spot on that podcast because one of the co-hosts was our clients, and still is. And so he gets me on this podcast, and sales went through the roof. It was like taking burger orders at In-N-Out. It was wild. So as a business owner, great. You couldn't count the money fast enough, but the problems were huge. It was, how do you service this work now that you've taken people's money? And we did as good of a job as we could, but it was a very stressful time in 22. Q4 of 2022 was very hard for us, which really bled into Q1 of 2023. So, but I think in that time, it was the traditional worry about sales. Sales will cure all. And sales were there and the money was there. So I guess the good side on that was it allowed us to have the capital to deploy on more labor. It was just by the time the labor got in, it was a little late. So, but I mean, I have a strong, I still get kind of yelled at it now. it's pretty uncommon in this newer age business industry to really give refunds. And I'm very big on like bad experience, take your money back. Cause as a consumer, that's what I would want. I try to make it as fair as I can. Like if you have a bad experience or you got half of what you bought, so it was a mix of refunds and it was a mix of saying, hey, we'll prolong your service from a year to 2 years. I would work with them to see what they wanted, but it's fun to talk about now. It's not fun to talk about then, but it was a huge, huge speed bump in our business.
But I think that that's one thing that I always find interesting sometimes with business owners is you can't really shy away from the difficult conversations. It actually creates, for me, more loyalty and longevity with your customer base because they really do, one, either feel your authenticity or the genuineness in your voice when you really care about the fact that they aren't getting what they signed up for and hearing them out. And honestly, that's really all that people can ask for is with a day and age of technology and AI and all these things where you really are more pushed towards self-serving and not being able to have that human aspect of things to then work with a company where they get to talk to somebody or they get to actually express why things didn't go the way they thought. I mean, that builds character, it builds strength in your business, even during a time where maybe people weren't having a great experience.
It's cool to think about too now because I almost weirdly like when people ask or at that time when they were saying, hey, I had a bad experience last year. Tell me why it won't happen again. Hey, sit down with me. Give me 15 minutes and I'll explain to you in detail why. You'd think it's almost cool because you would see somewhat of the insights of, wow, this business like really hit it big and then just had a struggle getting to where it needed to be to service that many clients. And it's funny. So right now this week I'm at a tax conference and it's one not only – and I think later on we can talk about it too. Just interesting to see the average age there. I'm 32. The average age there has to be 65 to 75. So they say 70% of CPAs are going to retire in the next 10 years, and I can see it in this room.
Are you worried about like the capacity and the workflow of just people getting engaged with accountants, right?
Labor.
Like for example, the construction industry and the trades, like that job. People have been suffering finding talent to come into those spaces. And there is this concern of labor shortage in that particular industry when you look, 10 years down the road. Do you see kind of the same thing in your world? Like how do you plan on building around that?
Talent acquisition now for us has been when you're a starting business, when you're a young business, talent acquisition I would hear that word and be like, great, that's not a problem we have. I'm worried about finding customers still. But when you have a book of business and clients are coming in, you turn into this, okay, now I need to spend the money that I've just earned to deploy and now service these people. So I think, yes, it'll always be an issue right now, especially in accounting. But how our business is kind of handling that is similar to what we talked about earlier, is education and sort of tax strategy at scale. So when you think about how our firm offers our services, if you take an old traditional CPA versus our firm, they look radically different. And I think it's because our model kind of fits to this labor shortage and more people, as we both know, needing not so hard advice. It's pretty clear and like well laid out as to what they need to do. It's just more so them taking the action to do it. And the benefit of that is for me or anybody on my team or any CPA to give that advice, I can easily do that to a room or a Zoom call of 20, 30, 40, 50, 500 people versus the in-depth tax planning conversations that need to take place over someone's estate.
Oh, wow. So that's actually interesting. So you're doing more of a classroom type of environment for your clients to say, like, I'm teaching a master class on this particular strategy. If you're interested in understanding more about that, then you can kind of tune in like that.
Here's exactly how our model works. If you want to meet with a CPA quarterly and you're one of those people that's like, hey, I saw this online. Why don't you tell me about this? And you want them to actively look after your situation. That's $6,500. That's a flat fee through us. You meet with them throughout the year. You have email access, all that. It's 1-to-1. If you're just like a newer level investor or small business owner, high W-2 earner looking to start a business, and you just need a couple questions answered for $3,000, you can see the price disparity too is way cheaper, but it's because it's in a group setting. So we use a platform called Circle. I just call it like a Facebook group on steroids, but there's videos in there of me talking about S Corps and LLCs and P&Ls and templates. There's templates in there. There's this big knowledge bank of stuff that I think a newer level investor and business owner needs. And then I just do live calls monthly. So I think for Black Friday, we're filming this it's a Tuesday, but in the last 4 days, we probably have 40, 50 people that have got it. So it's tax strategy at scale is what we call it, because it helps me from a labor perspective. I don't need to deploy a lot of people to do that. I can do what I run the calls now. And again, it still gives, because my biggest thing too is in business. I feel like I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm going on 5. Is it's important for people to get what they pay for and see the value, at least for me as a business owner, because I'm in this business. I want recurring revenue. I want to wake up the next year knowing that if I don't sell $1, I have, a book of business coming back. And I think for $3,000, whatever lower price point that is, it's easy. I'm able to give you that value easy. So that's how we've structured our services, which is uncommon compared to other CPAs that don't do Zoom calls or group things.
Or bookkeeping type of elements. Like, tell me a little bit about that, just because that is something that, for example, I teach a class through the Las Vegas Chamber as part of their EDGE program. It's a program for minority women-owned businesses. And a lot of those business owners are either there because their businesses are, having some challenges, or they're just barely starting out, or they're recovering, from COVID and kind of still trying to find their footing. But it's always interesting to kind of listen to different businesses and their mindset around financials and financial reporting. I remember listening to a little snippet of a podcast that you actually had on your Instagram. And it was funny because you said something that I feel like I've said a million times, where I'm like, you have to know where your money's going.
Oh, yeah.
So it's as simple as that, if anything. But tell me about that, because that's a huge point of contention and stress for a lot of businesses.
Huge.
Is figuring out how to, understand the financial aspect of things and how to then use that as useful information to then plan and strategize around it. What do you do in your realm or kind of help with that? Because that's a problem set that I think businesses always continuously have. Even when you give them the rule book, they're like, yeah.
Okay. So bookkeeping, which to this topic is, even before taxes, I did accounting. So this is where I'm much more passionate about the bookkeeping side of things, because I think that's just where I'm stronger as far as a knowledge base goes. Because at the end of the day, numbers are numbers, but balance sheets and P&Ls. So I want to fix bad bookkeeping like it's world hunger, okay, for at least small business owners. And so the quick answer is how we solve this. We have a service that offers it to people. So if people want to pay monthly for it, but as you know, most small business owners aren't going to pay $300, $400, $500 for bookkeeping. I would tell them as an advisor, don't pay for that, because I feel like, one, it's a good exercise for you to do, and 2, you would save the cash that you could ultimately use to probably find more customers or whatever the case is.
Well, and if someone's doing it for you, you're generally not looking at it.
You're not at all.
Yeah. I do have somebody that does my bookkeeping, and I love them because I don't have time. But I'm also a finance person. So as soon as they close my books,
you know how to look at it.
I'm reviewing that with my very confused husband, who is just staring at me like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand,
And that's where, even further into bookkeeping, because now, so I've just it was a huge feat for us. Our bookkeeping price per month was $500. And again, just to share context, I'm not trying to share the dollar amounts for any other specific reason, is we were at $500 a month. It's very hard to get, and our bookkeeping practice, for context, show some experience, we're going to do about $700,000-800,000 this year in bookkeeping, just the bookkeeping practice. So pretty sizable. It's a good amount of business. And but again, that's a business owner that's going to pay somebody to do the books every month. I needed to get prices down to $250 because I needed to be able to bring on, I would do so many tax returns for people, and come tax time, I'd say, hey, where's your numbers? And they'd say, I need a little bit. Or they'd send me something that is just horrendous. Or they'd say, why can't you just do it off my bank statements, which is our favorite line. And what does that do? That slows down my tax prep practice, the same way it slows down your loan apps and everything you guys have going on internally. So to fix this problem is, at least our stab at it, you can pay us to do it for you, or you pay me to show you how to do it, or at a minimum, I'm going to give you the resources and the tools to do it, which would just be simply like a template. But I don't know. The sad part is I feel like most people start to understand what a problem is, what a problem it is, that they don't look at it when it really bites them, which is sad. But it's like, I don't know how to really, let's solve it on this podcast, because I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to really steer them clear of it, because until it stings them, they don't really understand the severity of it. So until the bank app does, until the bank loan doesn't close, until that, they lose out on the house that they're trying to get, until they didn't get a loan for their business to push payroll out for the next 3 months. So whatever it is, it's going to really just sting them, is my thought. But
One thing that I find really unique about your business model is the social media aspect of it and kind of the power behind being able to do that. But one thing that is also scary, and maybe you have seen this too, is I'll see a lot of, like, for example, I follow you. So I listen to a lot of the different things that you talk about and say, and I'm like, that sounds accurate. That's, an interesting kind of topic that you're sharing. But then in my algorithm, I'll all of a sudden get people. A lot of other tax people or just investment people. And that is the part that kind of makes me a little bit nervous about the social media power. Because, for example, I saw one video where somebody was talking about using credit card advances at 0% promos to then buy a property free and clear, make it into an Airbnb, and then refinance that into a traditional mortgage after it's cash flowing. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds very scary. Could that work?
Yes, but no.
For people, but it is interesting. Do you ever see that being an issue with the social media aspect of business, like related to something where it's intangible, right? It's more of your expertise and experience that's really kind of driving what it is that you're talking about versus people that are out there that maybe don't have necessarily that same background or are just trying to become a financial coach, but not necessarily sharing solid practices.
It's a problem for us in the sense of they'll watch, and this is where I try to end some of these videos when I talk online like that, because I've even had people try and, let's say, fact check me, and then you got to get into these debates there. I've seen bad advice. What I try to tell people there is anything that you hear online should be used as that kind of sounds like something I'm involved in. Let me start to look into this and also ask my advisor if you have one. The problem that it poses for us is, yes, people hear this stuff and they come to us saying, hey, I'm ready to do this. And then they pay us money to tell them, no, you can't. So, because that's where one of the biggest challenges in our business is if somebody gets on a sales call or just starts to, let's say, meets me somewhere, meets someone from my team somewhere, they kind of treat you like a doctor where they're like, hey, well, I have you for a minute. Can I ask you some of these questions? And the problem with that is you're essentially now giving them free service when they're not engaged, and you're not even engaged to do so. So I would say it's the misinformation and people thinking that they can do things, but then ultimately getting into the weeds of things that they can't. So it's always my disclaimer of like, the good side is, there's a lot of good information floating around there. Like that's a crazy scenario that could work, but it's not. 99% of the time, it's not going to work. So I think just trying to groom an overall audience of people on a platform to say, hey, this isn't, you got to just watch this and try to see if it sparks an interest, not rely on it. Would be my thought.
My favorite thing to say to people when they ask me about finances or even some of the things that they've seen is I go, it depends, because that's what is so unique and interesting about financials and the financing is it really depends on your situation, your financial position, your trajectory, your historical performance, your, projections, your strategic planning, everything. So it's really hard for me to say yes or no or be able to appeal to a greater, broader audience on a particular topic because it just depends on how you're using that information and where you are today, right? That's a difficult component. You do it very well, though, I will tell you.
Walk through that, though, because no one likes the answer of it depends, even though we know it's the right answer. And it's like, well, hey, great. Like, because nowadays, somebody was just saying like how easy it is to check out with things. Like when you're buying something from a platform, it's almost too easy with all the Affirm and like you can finance it now.
Buy now, face recognition.
So it makes me think is like to that answer, they don't want to hear the it depends. Great. Well, here's this information that I need to give you a clean answer. But what's the problem? They don't have the information trickling back to the bookkeeping. So it's like, they can get the answers that they want and even the timeliness I think that they want. But the problem is they're not putting in the work to get people like professionals like us the information that we need to give them good answers would be my thought.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one important thing. I hope you do solve the problem of bookkeeping because that is on both of our sides, the banking side and the CPA side. That's always been somewhat of a challenge, I think, for clients to understand the importance of that information. So we've kind of talked about the labor shortage. Tell me a little bit about like company culture. You said that, do you still have everyone kind of working remote? And how that's a unique kind of business platform just because so many business owners that generally I encounter and talk to, they're like, you need to be in the office and I want you in the office, and
Yeah.
remote is going away and it's going to be gone soon. So what's kind of your take on that, or how have you been able to grow with a remote environment and build culture? It's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah, no. So the team has grown way faster than I thought it would. It was just me for like the first 8 months. First employee was about a year later. Now we're up to 30. So in 5 years, we got 30 full-time people, 8 overseas, and the rest here.
How did you find the overseas folks? Was it like
They're
online
through
posting?
two staffing companies. So it's which from our perspective really helps with like from an IT perspective and just security. And so that was pretty easy, honestly, because that's what's when you really look at our business now. If I needed to turn on labor very heavily, I could get a lot of people overseas to get on quick and start doing the work that we need, like prepare tax returns and stuff like that, or bookkeeping. From the jump, we've always been remote. I'm just trying to think back. It's like that was something that I wanted at the firm where I was at. I didn't need to be in a chair. This is a position as a CPA. When you come up, you're like, why am I sitting here? I don't need to be here. I'm not talking with the client necessarily. I'm doing work that could be done anywhere. And I also think that from the beginning, it was a unique advantage for us to drive good labor. So it was I think about one of the guys on my team now, Jerry. He came from the Big Four, used to wearing a suit. He's in office. And I think, and just, some of the other talent is they've been in office. They want a change of pace. They want that flexibility of working from home. I think I'm the last generation though, where I did work really hard in office. And, I was sitting there till 2, 3 a.m. when the partners were there. And then it was the waterfall effect. The partner left, the manager left, the senior left, then you got to leave. Yeah. And I kind of miss that because I don't buy this. You're more productive at home. I really don't. And even now running my own business, I just think that you're not. No one's going to convince me you are.
There's just so many distractions.
There's distractions and information doesn't flow as fast. So the week before last, we had an in-person meeting. It was tax and leadership right? So our departments, we have accounting, tax, and planning. Tax was in town. Just being in town for 3 days with that one team was so fun because the information moves so fast and the conversations you're having. It's not like if I got up to go to the restroom, I could easily talk to somebody for a few minutes. If I get up at my house, I'm not going to get on a Zoom call quickly and call somebody. So, but now next week we have our whole team in town. And so that's going to be another week where we just clearly see that for a full virtual remote team, it's cool for them to see people in person now, but also like you get a lot done in that amount of time because the information moves faster. So I think it was a branch of that's the kind of firm I wanted to build. And I think it helps us find labor because it's a cool, unique advantage, like getting to work remote. I think that's like my wife. She works for MGM. She left COVID saying like, I'll never go back. And it worked out so well for us because we have young kids. Yeah. I got the twins and I got a 5-year-old. So like my kids are all under 5. So for her, I
couldn't work at home, like, cause I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I remember when we were primarily working remote, I actually always kind of worked in the office just because there weren't a lot of people here. And I had tons of monitors here, which was super nice.
The station is nice.
Yeah, to be able to work remote. But it gave me that like focus and clarity of quiet that I just really needed to be able to work fast and quick. When you are in an environment where it's like your kids don't understand when you're on a meeting or what silence means ever, so that stuff is always kind of challenging. But not only that, the remote part, how frequently do you meet with your team in person? Because there is synergy and power and energy that kind of just gets transferred across like a group that gets to work together. Yep. Do you feel like that part is kind of being missed, or how do you capture that with remote workers?
I think I have an honest answer to that because I do believe that you're going to be more productive in person. So I know that my firm right now is not being as productive, and we do miss those opportunities because I see them happen when we are in person. Like I said, next week's I'm thinking going to be magical. We're going to have everybody in office and for the first time with a team this big. But meetings now, like like if you get on a Zoom call with me and your camera's not on, I'm not having the meeting. Like, so small stuff like that. Yeah. A lot of phone calls. It's kind of bled into texting, but a lot of Slack, but like certain leadership members, I'll text. Because if we're going to shut down one channel of communication, which is in person, face to face, you better open up every other one that you have. Yeah. Because the information needs to flow. We can't just talk on the phone once a week and think, run a department meeting and think we're going to be okay. So I think there's like my office manager. So every day in the office, it's me, my COO, a marketer, and a setter. And then every couple of days, our 2 admin will come in. right? And one of those is my office manager. I'll sit on Zoom with her for 3 hours and we're just clicking away at the keyboard because we're sitting there and can still talk if we need to.
Yeah.
So some of that starts to happen, but I think overall we definitely do miss out on that, just that interaction that you would get in person and that good vibe and that. But I think a lot comes from that.
No, exactly.
It's just hard
It's a
yes,
double-edged,
it is.
sword. It's like you can't have your cake and eat it too necessarily,
Yeah.
but there's obviously good things that happen, like finding talent and giving flexibility that, to be honest, there's value in that to a lot of employees and, colleagues that you have. There's value in being able to have the flexibility of just knowing you wake up, business on top, pajamas on bottom, and you can still be very productive and work from home. Some people kind of thrive in a setting.
They do.
Me, I get so overwhelmed and distracted sometimes with just every element of communication coming at me. So when I work remote and I'm also on a Teams meeting, I now am more aware of it. I try to focus because there's been so many times, not so many, right? I don't think Terry will listen to this podcast, but there's been a couple of times where someone has asked me a question and I'm like, I'm sorry, can you repeat that question for me? And it's in, with colleagues and other people on the call and that you're maybe a little bit more senior and they're like, all right, well, Megan's not paying attention. Like so it makes it a little bit more challenging. But I like the on-camera thing, I think is important. We do that as well.
Cameras are huge and we have set meetings. I mean, every day I have some sort of meeting that I'm in with the department or one-on-ones but it's very structured meetings. So every week and then, just a lot of Slack, email, and Zoom, a lot of it, or even Slack has their huddle feature. So and I'm a huge FaceTimer. COVID turned me into a FaceTimer.
Yeah, me too. I mean, well, I do, but sometimes in public, I try to be mindful of the fact that if you're at North Italia or a restaurant, you're not trying to. Although I see a lot of people doing it. It's like very normal nowadays. I'm like, I don't know. Are they doing their own like private testimonial or like, are they talking to someone?
Filming?
Like,
are
it's
they
very
talking?
challenging to tell nowadays.
Yeah.
So as far as like your customer feedback or things that you've kind of talked to about your clients, tell me a little bit about how maybe you leverage that information. Like, do you get feedback from them on what it is that they want to hear topics on? Or because now you have this bigger book of business, do you leverage and use that information to then say, hey, I'm kind of seeing this, across the board, since you kind of focus on particular industries and certain things?
Okay, so you're talking about not necessarily like complaints and how I pivot my firm
just more
forward,
like
but just
stats.
like tax news and stuff like that. Yeah, I get a lot of it honestly, other than like your Yahoo and like big just news articles and what's going on because that obviously drives our industry. But yeah, the trends online for sure. Like when the 1099 rules were coming out and people were freaking out about the Zells and the Venmos, and so you hop on those trains because now you're somebody that ideally holds that precious information that everybody is like waiting to figure out what's going on with. And so I'd like to say that's one of my superpowers is I can dumb down what is normally a complex topic to something pretty simple. So yeah, I just think I don't really try to set those trends. I just wait to ride those waves, see the wave pick up and I'm hopping on it and whether that's a video that I see that's really picking up or I subscribe to other tax articles and I think it's going to be something relevant to our client base. Like depreciation is huge for our client base. So whether it's cars or real estate, so stuff like that is, those buzzwords is what I watch for.
What about, this is the question, it came back to me, the seasonality
huge.
aspect of your business.
Huge.
How do you manage through that? Because I know that in your world, that is a huge pain point, and it's actually a big stressor for a lot of firms and a lot of employees that work within firms. It's like not their favorite. Tell me how you kind of deal with that with your employees and also just yourself.
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of use the term flatten the curve, which I feel like they were using around like because we look at a graph, so we track everything pretty specifically. And if you watch our tax production numbers, so we're really just us cranking returns out, it obviously gets super big in Feb, March, and April, really dies down in the summer, and then picks right up in August, September, October. And I think for that it is people come into this industry, at least, and I think about my tax manager with this, he's like, I basically have no life for those 6 months because when you're coming into this industry, you have to understand that there is seasonality to it. So during those times, you are going to be busier. You're not going to work 40 hours. You're going to work 50 to 60, 50 to 70, somewhere in there maybe. And so I think it's not only the mentality of people in this industry know that you're going to pick up at that time, but like what we do specifically around those times is we try to almost gatekeep who can get their stuff done by certain dates. So how we do that is like, a business return is due March 15th. So we will set a deadline of, let's call it Feb 5th. You need to have your numbers, your P&L, which is pretty soon after the year end. That's what is only 30 days, 35 days, is you need to get us your numbers, get us your tax docs, because then we will guarantee you, hey, we will try to get your return filed by that deadline. If you give us the docs we need, we'll get it done. So the beauty of that is not everybody's going to hit that. So by having those cutoff dates, it allows us to at least have a hard stop to say, hey, 70 clients made it past this day. Now we're just going to focus on these 70 clients. But then the tough part about the business is now all those, let's say 400 people that have been emailing you, you're not looking at their stuff. So one of the complaints that we got in 22 and 21, let's say, is, hey, I sent you my stuff on March 8th. Let's say for the 15th deadline. It's like, we're not going to look at that. No one's looking at that. We're working on the work that's in the door. And then we wrote them back by the end of May with like, hey, Jim, thanks. You sent us 8 of the 10 items. I still need these 2. And Jim goes, why didn't you tell me that when I sent it to you in March? And you're like, well, Jim, I'm not looking at your stuff in March. And so that is one of the hardest pieces of this business is figuring that out. But I think having those just pure cutoff dates is really helpful. But the problem is you send those emails and clients don't even read them.
Well, and it's usually as a fire drill. I was going to ask you what percentage of your client base actually just goes file an extension?
Oh, so we file extensions for almost every client unless they're very explicit on like, hey, don't want one and we're going to be done by the deadline. Because even if clients are like, oh, don't worry, I'll be done by the deadline. We're like, yeah, no, you won't. We're just going to still file this for you. So percentage-wise, we ended up like 38, because the next year's goal is 40. We're going to try to do, and we basically almost did 40 this year. It's 40% of tax returns were filed by April 15th. So you can see the rest trickles, the remaining 60 is going to trickle over summer. And here's good numbers. We were supposed to do about 1,000 tax returns this year. So let's say about 400 of them were done by April. And we still have, let's say, 80 to 100 that aren't done after October. So you still have 5 to 10% of the book that just like doesn't get you their stuff and they're late. But it's like, if you're going to get a refund, you're not really late. I mean, you're late, but you're not late. So again, of the 3 pieces of our business, prep, planning, and accounting and bookkeeping basically, is prep is the biggest, most difficult machine to manage. There's too many gears turning at once. And like you in this business and banking, you're waiting on clients for stuff, which is just the worst part about it. Because if we could get in and get those docs ourselves, or they would listen to our advice as to keep up with their stuff during the year, we wouldn't be in this problem. But that's what makes it so challenging. There's just
so much power in the prep, though, too, that I think a lot of small businesses can really benefit from. I think about business owners and how reactive sometimes they can be to situations rather than being proactive as much as they possibly can. There's always going to be reactive components to any business, and things that kind of throw you for a curveball. And I mean, sometimes it feels like it's happening on a daily, but I feel like a lot of that can be minimized if you do some of the prep and you are a little bit more proactive in your strategy. My husband's companies, they're not big by any means. They're small businesses, but I've already been able to see the difference with me always focusing on strategy and using historical data and historical information to then leverage that and push us forward.
That's the next level, though. We don't need them to do that.
Yeah, and there's so much power in that as a business owner, and it helps you become more financially sound and stable as a company, and the stress kind of goes away, right?
Totally.
It doesn't get completely eliminated, but it does tend to get subsided a little bit, and you can focus more on the exciting parts of your business and the things that you really want to accomplish. And so that is constantly, I think, a fine line with, I envy business owners because they're risk takers. They have a lot of moxie, but at the same time, they kind of remind me of like the Gryffindor house, in Harry Potter. They just kind of like run, towards doing things, not necessarily always understanding the consequences or how to kind of like make sure that you could do it in the best, most optimal way.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm a Harry Potter nerd kind of.
My wife is too.
I love it.
It's a funny story after.
But yeah, so I wish that there was a little bit more planning there.
When you think of prep though, so what exactly do you think? Because I know what I think about, and I think of bookkeeping. But I'm like, when you say the word prep, it's like, hey, yeah, business owner that's making 80 grand a year, 120 a year. If you just took the time to look through your bank statement, throw some categories next to those transactions, I feel like mentally, and I'll call it physically, but you would be in such a better spot if you just did that I feel like that's what we got to, at least this first stepping stone.
It depends on how big and complex your business is. I
Totally.
feel like, for business owners, a lot of them have a very simple kind of structure, which is nice because it is very minimal, portions of prepping that can really kind of help you move the needle forward. I also think that it's more of the time component. A lot of people have a difficult time with time management and understanding when is the right time or when should I block out and dedicate time to focus on these things, which kind of brings me to actually my next question for you, because you mentioned something when we talked last time that I found really interesting. And I think a lot of businesses kind of struggle with this, where you are like the owner operator, but then you have to kind of move into this visionary role. You have to move into this role where now you're kind of more 10,000 feet above, and you're not necessarily in the nitty gritty. Like, it's virtually impossible for you to be in the trenches, but then also be focusing on long term and kind of where you see the business going and where is the next best move as a company. Can you share a little bit about kind of that transition for you? And that will be my last question actually for you. But
no, that's cool, because that I've taken a lot of time personally to think about that, because when I started this business, I was very much the gear turner, the operator. Hey, I was the licensed CPA. You get online and dance. You send us the clients. I will take care of them. And so at that, what's interesting too, I think, to support this is, at that time, we all took personality tests on, I think it's called the predictive index. And so my personality profile was the altruist at that time. Just a little more operator, looking into details, but also when I wanted to make a decision, I would ask a lot of people. It also annoys my wife, but it's like, that's how I am. I want to get all the data that I can before I make a decision. And so it's funny, recently, this is maybe four months ago now, I've retaken that test and I'm now a venturer, which is more so on the driving side. And the only personality trait that has switched has been instead of now being more collaborative for decision making, I'm more driving in myself, which for me, I feel like great, because I know this business now. I've been doing it for, it feels like 20 years, 5 years. But so for me, I've got to watch that change very clear. And it's just like yesterday. Yesterday, I'm talking with Steven, my COO. We have a new hire that's coming on board that has 8 to 10 bookkeeping clients of his own. We are going to acquire those clients, because part of hey, I don't want you doing side work here. I respect it, but like, you either got to sell it to us or let them go somewhere. So we're going to buy that. Steven calls me and he's like, hey, do we have the buyout agreement for these clients? And I'm like, I could care less, Steven. I don't know. Just get the clients onboarded at our firm. Just have them sign our engagement letters. And so it was just an exact example, because now I've hired a COO to come in and ideally replace me for what I was and just oversee ops and these gears turning. And so I like now that when me and him have these conversations, I can clearly see the yin and the yang as to somebody brings up a problem. Prior, Matt would have dropped everything I was doing to try to say, okay, how bad is the problem? And like, let's try to think of a solution. Versus the other day, that same scenario pops up, problem comes up. I thought about how I would have handled it. Steven handles it. 5 minutes later, the problem wasn't as big as what this person even thought it was, and they solved it in 5-10 minutes. Versus how I even would have done that would have been radical, probably wasted 2 or 3 hours looking into these other options of how to fix it. And so I like now watching live time scenarios where it's like, I am the 30,000 foot view, 10,000 foot view, because I feel like I have a good understanding of what the vision for the firm needs to be, versus now he can take the time to like really dissect what's going on, because I call it like my ADD. I can't do that anymore. My brain won't allow me to slow it down like that. I'm already on to the next. We'll do exercises in the office. We do a late nighter a week where we'll go from like 7 p.m. to like 2. We'll just go by in and out, and we'll just rage out on spreadsheets, because you can't really do it during the day.
Yeah.
And so we'll do this at night, and it's funny to walk through certain exercises where I can just see it's painstaking for me to go line by line, but it's something that he's like, we got to do it. And so I just like watching that now, because I feel like that was me when I started this business. Now I'm just not, because I'd rather worry about where we're going now. Well,
and it's good that you found someone that you kind of trust and believe and can focus on the details. I find that interesting too. That's one thing that I'm trying to kind of focus on with my husband's companies, and even just running a division for the bank is, are you getting to an end result that is the most optimal outcome? Fantastic. If you get there differently than me, or it takes you a little bit longer, like, I'm not going to painstakingly try to hover over you and like force you to do it my way. I'm going to be okay with the way that you want to do it, because it's you, and you need to learn it, and that gives you more confidence and power to be able to, continue growing in the way that you need to.
Yeah. And that's where, like, I would look back at the roles. I used to think like, oh, you're a visionary. Like, what do you do? But now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a full-time job. It's a full-time job to really understand the current sentiment of your client base and like, what are your opportunities and what should you capitalize on? I'm like, okay, now that is a full-time job. I was always like, what are you doing up there? Just like
puttering around.
Yeah, get to work, turn a gear. But now I'm like, oh, okay, there's a little bit more strategic thinking here that needs to happen. So that's been a huge thing for me because, and again, watching the personality profiles for me was amazing because I can feel the change now day to day.
Well, I like that you bring up the personality profiles actually, just because that is one thing that I try to focus on with my teams.
Yeah.
Is I want to understand what type of personality you have and how you can communicate with that individual.
Oh,
I feel like
huge.
that's the crux of any business sometimes is communication styles and forgetting that there are different communication styles around you. And at some point, both of you guys need to acquiesce and kind of bend to obviously meet each other in the middle. It's a lot harder than normal, especially like me, for example. I'm a red. I can't remember what communication.
Oh, on the color codes? Yeah.
Yep, the
Type
color
A?
codes. I'm a red. I'm facts only. Do not waste my time. And I don't mean to be, assertive or direct. Or mean by any means. I just need it very fast because I'm trying to work very fast.
Yep.
So it's interesting when you are with like a blue or someone that wants to tell you the emotion behind it and the storytelling and everything. And I'm like, please tell me fast. Like right before we came up here, I had that situation happen. I'm like, I have 5 minutes. I need you to tell me in one. And then they kept going. I go, we're still not there yet. We're not there. This is me being, and they're like, you're just being such a red right now. But I love that we have that communication. They know that I'm not.
The fact that they know you're, so it's, I have to share this little story. So, because 2 hours ago, I'm on the phone. Next week, the whole team's coming in. We're looking through the agenda and I'm like, dang, we have nothing to do the back half of, this was Wednesday or Thursday. So one of the guys in our office, his wife does this color coding and so we're having her come in and she's going to do it for the whole team. The best example that I have that I'm going to share with the team is my COO, Steven. He is a high operator, typically type A, but needs to know the really low level details. He's the gear turner. And then you have Jerry, who runs our tax department, who is they're both on this, we'll call it like range of, they're both driving forces. So they're both pretty independent. And they are not getting along when Steven first gets hired. Jerry's almost like, what value does this guy even bring here? And so I'm like having to bridge these two. And I was like, I think we should do these tests. So we do these tests and come to find out it's like Jerry never understood that it's not only in Steven's personality, but in his role to ask small level details. And so when you look at Jerry's characteristics, and I think back to one of the arguments, we're like yelling at each other over a Zoom call. Because that's another thing. I work off like radical transparency, which is, if you don't like an idea, you better speak up or don't ever say later, like, well, I told you so, because you never said anything earlier.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Exactly. So Jerry's like yelling at us, like, why do you even care about these things when all we care about is the top line number? And the number was 1.8 million. And it was at that time that now once we got the personality profiles to come back to see like, well, look at Jerry. He only cares about top line. But then when Jerry got to read Stevens and understand why he's asking these low-level questions, it clicked. And it was so cool to watch that play out. And now they understand how to communicate with one another. And they're blossoming, working great together. Yeah. But it was because of that mismatch that they're not understanding that not only is it a role thing, but it's how these people operate in the business.
Well, and the diversification of personalities. To me, I love seeing my team all come together. They're all very diverse, very different. When we all get along, it's beautiful. When things kind of, are disruptive and that people are not getting along, it's also very interesting for me to see, just because there's power in communication, and really the communication aspect behind it is understanding how to talk to each other and what lens are they looking through. It's very different for people. So I love that you do that as a business, because that's one thing that I think a lot of small businesses don't always focus on is understanding team cohesiveness and the beauty of communication and understanding styles, because styles are so different, but all styles are necessary. And styles gravitate towards certain roles in a company too, which I find interesting, but doesn't mean that they're exclusively in that role. Just means that, sometimes they kind of all gravitate towards specific areas.
Yeah, it'd be huge. It's like somebody that would approach you that doesn't know you're a red and is like wanting this like fluff talk and detail, and they're not going to get that from you.
Yeah. And well, I know we did a 360, and I remember my team like really just destroyed me because they said I didn't say good morning. I never said good morning or asked how their weekend was. And in my mind, I was like, we're at work. Like, why would I socialize? But then I was like, oh my goodness, that makes complete sense. I need to actually ask people about their lives. Like, that's such a simple thing, but I just never thought
But see,
about
you're
it
not
that
doing
way.
it. So I always like to use the word ill intent. You're not doing it out of ill intent, because that's where, like, if you could sense that, then it'd be like, there's a problem here.
Yeah.
But you're just not thinking about it.
But the
So,
stories that people tell themselves
of course,
is kind of what goes into that. But
and that's why I like that personality test, because now you're seeing on paper, like, oh, this is why this is why Jerry was yelling at us. Like, why are you asking me small questions? Just worry about the top number. But we're like, Jerry, it's this guy's job to worry about that. And it's his personality to ask you details. So it was so cool. It's nice to see, living through these experiences, the textbook kind of thing back it up. That, oh, okay, this is how this works. And so to the small business owner point, though, is like, I don't think most small business owners have a lot of staff. So, like, maybe the team side doesn't really make sense for them to do. It's like, just worry about the numbers. Worry about the bookkeeping. Worry about the bookkeeping.
focus on that. All
I
right.
know.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for being here today. And thank you for tuning in to Through the Door, the insider's perspective on running a business.